Welcome back to the Brittany Hughes Show, everybody. So New Orleans is apparently spending millions of dollars on art installations honoring Black and brown artists, all while the city completely goes to hell in a handbasket. Apparently New Orleans is just falling apart. Crime in this city is skyrocketing. If you happen to be from New Orleans or if you live there now, I'm very interested in hearing from you in the comments because I've never actually been to New Orleans. It's on my bucket list to go. I think it's a fascinating city. It's full of art and culture, and I think it's a very, very interesting place. I have family members that have spent a lot of time there. But I'm not really sure that I would want to go now because apparently it's an incredibly dangerous place. I didn't realize this until I even started looking into it. But let's start with this first. So in the middle of all of that, this is what the city is apparently spending millions of dollars in. This is bond money. I'm assuming through local reports that I've read that this is municipal bond money, which is supposed to be used for capital improvement projects like streets and schools and that kind of thing. But instead, it's now being funneled into a multi-million-dollar effort to recognize local Black artists for Juneteenth, which is apparently not just a federal holiday. It's also a days or even weeks-long celebration in some of these places. So this is the statue that they erected in Lafayette Square. It's by an artist named Hank Willis Thomas, and this is part of the city's $7.2 million effort to recognize Black artists. It's an Afro pick. It's a giant Afro pick, and it's got a Black Power fist at the top of it. Interestingly, this thing is titled All Power to All People, which I do find slightly ironic considering it's got a Black Power fist at the top, which has historically not connotated all power to all people. It is a Black Power fist. So this particular sculpture is part of a traveling installation. I believe it's been in Philadelphia. I know it was in Atlanta for a little while. So it kind of rotates around the country. And there are private funds that do go to this. There's a nonprofit that kind of takes this thing around, and it stays for weeks or months or whatever. And now it's been set up in New Orleans, Lafayette Square. And this is part of a multi-million-dollar effort, like I said, by the city. Mayor LaToya Cantrell saying that the city is spending millions of dollars to honor local Black and brown artists. Apparently, they've also already purchased about 60 pieces of art that they're going to display in various parts around the city. And all of this is one gigantic virtue signal by the leftist government in New Orleans to try to express how much they care about Black and brown people, about how much they care about minority communities. We're putting sculptures up, and this is supposed to be to honor them and to commemorate them and all of the efforts and all of the contributions that Black Americans have made. Interestingly enough, though, this is also a city whose predominantly Black residents are coming increasingly under victimization from extremely violent crime. So I didn't realize this again until I looked at it. New Orleans' murder rate is among the highest in the country. As a matter of fact, per capita, it's worse than Baltimore. Clocking in at 218 murders in 2021. There's no sign of that slowing down in 2022. There have already been 141 homicides so far this year. That's 40% more than the same time frame last year. So all of this comes after the police department's budget was slashed. This was all part of the Black Lives Matter effort back in 2020. So the city lost 150 police officers in 2021. They are now operating at a 60% capacity. So violent crime is now skyrocketing, and there aren't enough police officers to respond to it. Here's a fun chart showing the increase in homicides over the past couple of years. And what's very interesting, if you notice this, because whenever you bring up crime in Black neighborhoods, whenever you bring up policing in urban communities, especially if you're a white person, one of the first pieces of pushback that you get is, well, you just want more Black people to be incarcerated. They're already incarcerated at a much higher rate, a disproportionate rate in this country. So you just want police officers to come into these communities and start cracking down on Black criminals. What that argument completely ignores, and what I'm about to prove to you in a local clip here, what that argument completely ignores is that the vast majority of victims of urban crime are minorities. It's Black and brown people that are being victimized most often by urban crime. And in New Orleans, local residents are actually trying to flee the city and are calling it a crisis and saying that their local leaders aren't doing enough to recognize it. Check this out.
Everyone seems to be in agreement.
Do you think New Orleans is at a crisis point in terms of crime?
Yes, I do. We are very much at a crisis point.
Because a lot of people is dying for no reason.
This is a crisis.
Dillard University political analyst Robert Collins says leaders may be hesitant to be associated with the term crisis because of its negative political connotations.
The elected leaders in the city don't seem to have the same opinion that the majority of the citizens have in the city, as far as that the city is in crisis mode right now and that they should be taking the appropriate emergency actions.
Data from AH Datalytics shows the city is on pace to be the murder capital of America in 2022. Current homicide rates show 72 per 100,000 residents, far higher than Birmingham, Baltimore, and St. Louis. Mayor LaToya Cantrell not going so far as to label the crime wave New Orleans is experiencing right now a crisis.
Would you classify crime in this city as a crisis?
I would say that public safety is a priority and requires a holistic approach.
We're on pace, if we keep this pace, to have the most murders since the 90s.
That's not true. That's not true at all.
Rafael Goyeneche of the Metropolitan Crime Commission says murders are on the rebound after bottoming out in 2019. Going back to 1995, the city saw 363 murders.
If the streets were flooded with water to the extent that they're flooded with violent crime right now, we'd be moving heaven and earth to pump the water out.
Okay, so again, the vast majority of these victims are Black folks themselves. And public polling has shown time and time again that they actually want more policing in their communities to keep them and their children safe. They want more of a police presence. When police officers don't show up to these neighborhoods, oftentimes the police chiefs are held accountable as, why aren't you doing enough to help our community? Why aren't you doing enough to increase policing and get these violent criminals off the streets? And in New Orleans, when you have got people being murdered and carjacked all over the place, this is starting to become a real problem. A 16-year-old Black boy was shot to death in May at 7:30 in the morning at a bus stop. Two 18-year-olds, here they are, and a 17-year-old were arrested.
Deputies say the Gilmore brothers and the unnamed teen were taken into custody shortly after the shooting. The victim has been identified as 16-year-old Ahmaud Howard. Deputies say Howard was gunned down in the 1800 block of Betty Street about 7:30 yesterday morning while walking to his bus stop.
More recently, 5 people were robbed at gunpoint on Sunday at a juice bar in the Lower Garden District. On Tuesday night, 2 people were killed, a third was injured in 2 separate shootings. 6 people were arrested in an armed robbery that ended in a murder last Wednesday. Here are those people.
Tonight, Bogalusa police make 6 arrests in a fatal robbery last Wednesday morning. Police say officers arrived at an apartment in the 300 block of 2nd Avenue just after 7 a.m. That's where they discovered the body of 50-year-old Travis Davis, shot several times, and detectives quickly identified several persons of interest, conducted interviews, and determined that Davis was the victim of an armed robbery that escalated to his murder. Police arrested Freddie McGowan, Christopher Ramsey, Erica Ramsey, and Michael James for first-degree murder. Taretha Johnson and Anna Peters were arrested for their involvement in the shooting.
I thought this was kind of funny, not funny. One man actually told a local outlet that his car had been broken into so many times in front of his home that he hired a private security guard to help protect him. And a week later, the private security guard was the victim of a carjacking in front of that very home. The security guard wasn't even safe.
We have all the opportunity, but this crime thing is definitely out of control.
This victim lives on St. Charles Avenue after burglars with guns broke into his vehicles multiple times. He hired his own armed security guard. That guard quickly became a victim in front of the home.
And within the first week, we had an attempted carjacking of the armed security guard by two individuals.
Your car is getting broken into and you figure, well, I'll hire somebody to look out for it. And then that guy ends up being a victim. That's how bad things have gotten in New Orleans. And instead of recognizing this crisis, which as you saw, again, you've got a mayor that can't even call it a crisis. Instead, she says, violent crime is not a good thing, and we've got to take, a holistic approach. There's only one reason why a politician says that we need to take a holistic approach. Either they don't know what they're doing, which is true sometimes, but the vast majority of the time, this is the predominant reason why a politician will say, well, we've got to take a holistic approach to something, including violent crime. It's because they know that the actual solution to dealing with the problem would not be politically expedient. And that is exactly what's going on here. And this is exactly why you see governments in these urban areas showering millions of dollars on virtue signals like Afro-pick statues as some sort of empty sign that they care about minority communities and that they want to recognize the contributions that Black people have made to this country, all while the same Black people right down the road are suffering from violent crime that the city refuses to get under control, and in fact, which left-wing policies continue to perpetuate with no end in sight. And we see this over and over and over again. I'm not trying to pick on New Orleans, but New Orleans is indicative of the problems that we have all across cities in this country, predominantly blue cities. And it's not just crime, by the way, education. So among New Orleans public schools, in the Orleans Parish School District, the minority enrollment is 89%. The predominant number of children in that school district are Black. Among public schools in Orleans Parish School District, there is an average math proficiency score of 63% and a reading proficiency score of 74%. So we are talking about the vast majority of these students are minority students, are Black students, and a quarter of them are not proficient in reading, and nearly 4 in 10 are not proficient in math. Again, we see this over and over again. Rampant crime, a failing education system. And at the same time, sculptures that are being erected to try to convince people, oh, we care about you. Oh, we care about minorities. It's not unique. DC, if you recall, in 2020 and 2021 spent $4.8 million on a Black Lives Matter mural near the White House. You can see this thing from space. Another $3 million was spent on reconstructing the sidewalks and adding benches, lighting signs, and trees. I'm all for beautifying places. I'm all for those efforts. Nobody wants to live in a trashy city. I get that. But we're talking about $8 million going to a Black Lives Matter mural that was essentially a gigantic thumb of the nose at President Trump because he was in office at the time. And this was designed to piss him off. It's an awfully expensive middle finger, courtesy of the American taxpayer. That's what this was. And it was an empty gesture to minority communities that this city cares about you. And it's empty because of this. By April 19th of 2021, all violent crime in Washington, D.C. sat at about 961 cases. By April 19th of this year, violent crime had already surpassed 1,230 cases. That's an almost 30% increase, including an increase in assaults with a dangerous weapon, including firearms. This is in a largely gun-free city. You cannot walk around with a handgun. You cannot get a concealed carry permit. Guns are by and large not permitted in this city, and yet gun violence and violent crimes in general are continuing to skyrocket at an alarming rate, including among juveniles. This is also a city in crisis. A 15-year-old was shot and killed, and a police officer was wounded just recently. This was during a Juneteenth concert just last weekend.
Early, Huh? There they go, look. Now they shooting. Now they shooting, look. They shooting. Right here, same cover. Same cover. Yeah.
Dr. Rakesh Patel, he was a 33-year-old doctor from Maryland who worked at MedStar Washington Hospital Center, was hit and killed by his own car in front of his girlfriend during a carjacking. And here's what D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser had to say about that.
There's no more important issue for us right now than dealing with people who are committing crimes in our city. And we saw one person who probably didn't intend to kill anybody, but did and devastated a family.
So we're just dismissing violent crime almost as accidental. Oh, he didn't actually mean to kill anybody. You know, it wasn't that it was a blunder. It was an accident. Yeah, he probably shouldn't have been trying to, I don't know, steal the guy's car, but he didn't actually mean to kill anybody. And that's an effort to downplay the crisis. That's an effort to downplay just how violent this city has become by almost painting this as sort of, these are accidental murders. These are accidental homicides. These aren't accidental. These are indicative of a city that has continued to be plagued by policies that keep people locked in cycles of dependency and poverty and despair and continues to gin up social ills. And this is the natural result. And nobody on the left wants to recognize that. It's why they won't use words like crisis. And it's why they want to continue to throw Afro-pick statues and Black Lives Matter murals on the street, because it's easier than actually dealing with the problems. And here's why. Because there is one very simple solution to this issue. Everybody wants to talk about this like it's this huge nuanced problem and it's really complicated and there's no silver bullet to this. There absolutely is. It's not that complicated. Here is the solution. Get the government out of the way. Because if you look, it is continually left-wing policies that are the drivers of these problems. Almost exclusively, you see it in the social arena. Black Lives Matter on their website in 2020 admitted that they reject the Western notion of the nuclear family, dismissing fatherlessness as though it has nothing at all to do with these problems. If you look across the spectrum, absolutely everything, from juvenile delinquency to substance abuse to anxiety and depression to failing education, absolutely everything can be traced back to increases in fatherlessness. Everything is made worse when fathers are absent from the home. And yet you see groups like Black Lives Matter dismissing that because it's not expedient to their cause. The minority communities that are most affected by this, they're absolutely plagued by broken homes and fatherlessness, and it's manifesting, but you can't call that out. You can't talk about that. You can't say that. So instead, we've got to dismiss it as that's not really the problem here. And you see left-wing policies that continue to promote that over and over and over again. Left-wing propaganda that completely dismisses fathers as needing to take active roles in their children's lives. We have seen an all-out left-wing assault on men and branding men as toxically masculine and completely dismissing their role and downplaying their role in society. And then you couple that with left-wing policies that continue to promote welfare dependencies, that continue to take away people's school choice and make it more difficult for families to get their children and their taxpayer dollars out of failing government-run schools and send their child to a school that might actually teach them something other than a bunch of woke garbage. And it's government control. It's the government's need to control all of this and to control minority communities that gins all of this up. Black people in cities are in poverty because the government, run by the left, needs them to be. Leftist politicians need minority communities to stay poor, to stay stuck in violence, to stay desperate, and to stay unable to help themselves, because in that case, the government is the only savior they've got. And leftist politicians know that. That's why they create boogeymen even when there isn't one. You can see it in things like voting rights. The vast majority of Black Americans support voter ID laws. But the left wants to paint this narrative that apparently Black people are too stupid to go get a photo ID before they vote, which is absolutely ridiculous. There's no data whatsoever that bears that out. It's incredibly insulting, but it fits in with exactly what I just said, this perpetuated narrative that Black people are inherent victims and can do nothing apart from the government. That's what the left needs. And that's exactly what you see here. You see leftist politicians that are ignoring the problems that they have helped create in minority communities, that are skyrocketing out of control, kids getting shot, carjackings in the stratosphere. And instead of dealing with that, they'll throw an Afro-pick sculpture and millions of dollars at a mural or a street painting, as though that's indicative of how much they love and care about minority communities. If you loved and cared about minority communities, you would deal with the policies that have created this generational systemic cycle for decades. But they don't want to do that because that cycle has been implemented on purpose. They need Black people to stay poor. They need Black people to stay dependent. And every now and then they'll throw a sculpture up and say, this is how much we appreciate your contributions to society. It is the most insulting, ridiculous nonsense. And this country and minority communities need to wake up. This right here, this is not an art installation meant to honor anybody. This is an effort to exploit and to use. This is all about votes. 100%. And with that, that is the Brittany Hughes Show for today. I will see you back here next Thursday, just in time for 4th of July. Make sure you go get your fireworks. I was actually at the store today, and they were completely out. But don't look for anything like that at Harris Teeter or Kroger, because apparently they're taking all of their patriotic merchandise and pro-Second Amendment koozies off the shelf because some yahoo complained about it. Yeah, seriously, here's that tweet. Harris Teeter and Kroger actually saying that they are removing pro-Second Amendment koozies. I mean, one of these actually, all it had on it was a quote from Patrick Henry, the famous "Give me liberty or give me death." But apparently that was triggering for a North Carolina Democrat who said that it was promoting gun violence. And Harris Teeter and Kroger actually apparently agreed. So if you're looking for your patriotic merchandise, don't go to Harris Teeter or Kroger. But I will see you back here next week. God bless.